Today, we'll be talking about sleeping and biological rhythms. So, consciousness, right? That's kind of like the whole unit we're doing. So, what is consciousness? It can be defined as our awareness of various cognitive processes such as sleeping, dreaming, concentrating, and decision making. So, we have awakened consciousness. That's a mental state that encompasses the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that occur when we are awake and reasonably alert. We have altered states of consciousness, so sometimes you'll just see ASC for this one. This is the mental state that differs noticeably from normal waking consciousness. So this could be daydreaming, meditation, intoxication, sleep hypnosis, anything like that. Those are all altered states of consciousness. So pretty much if you're not awake and alert of what's going on. Daydreaming is something we talk about. It's a type of altered state of consciousness that occurs seemingly without effort, typically when we want to momentarily escape the demands of the real world. So usually sometime during the day in class. I know when I was in high school, that was a really bad habit of mine. But now, if you're at home listening to this though, so hopefully you're not daydreaming as much. Biological rhythms, right? So this is your periodic physiological fluctuations which affect body processes like temperature, blood pressure, and the effectiveness of medicines. So we're aware of some of these rhythms, but most actually run on autopilot and aren't really given a second thought. And we'll talk about a few different ones. First one is circadian rhythm. This occurs once during a 24-hour period. So like the sleep-wake cycle, right? That's a 24-hour period. Every 24 hours, you sleep for some of it, you're awake for some of it. Hopefully it's about sleeping 8 hours, awake 16 hours, depending on how old you are. Hopefully you're somewhere around there. The ultradian rhythms. These occur more than once a day. So like the various stages of sleep each night. So depending on how long you sleep, you should be going through roughly 4 to 5 stages of sleep. Each one lasts about an hour and a half. And then the last one is infradian rhythms. This occurs once a month or a season. So like bears hibernating, right? Because they hibernate during the season. Think about what else happens monthly. If you said menstrual cycle, that's one obvious choice for an infradian rhythm. So why do we sleep, right? Originally, psychologists thought we slept because our neurons disconnected from each other, causing us simply to drift off, right? In reality, we don't have a complete answer as to what causes us to sleep. We know that's not really it, but we know sleep is extremely important. So we do know that the hypothalamus, right? We've talked about this before, so make sure you know this, is the control center for our 24-hour rhythm of sleep. So the hypothalamus senses changes in light and dark and sends neurological messages to your brain and body that put you to sleep. If you remember during the brain unit, I kind of mentioned this a little bit. That's why, like if you're sleep deprived and you're in a dark room, you might sleep for 14 hours. Um, but if you're in like Vegas in a casino, they're pumping oxygen and they're pumping bright lights in there that keeps you awake. It tells your brain you're awake. And so you might walk out thinking it's, midnight when really it's 7 a.m. the next day, but your brain, kind of wasn't sending those messages to you that you should be sleeping because it was so bright out. One of these neurological transmitters is melatonin. All right, so that's something you probably heard a lot about with sleep. So what it is, it's a hormone connected to the sleep-wake cycle that builds up while we sleep. And there's good and bad things you can take to help you sleep. Melatonin is something natural in you that people take to help their sleep cycle. So measuring sleep activity. Um, Also during the brain unit, we talked about different machines that we use to measure sleep activity. And if you remember, the one machine we talked about was the EEG machine. So that's one of the main brain machines that we use to measure our sleeping and our dreaming. So the stages of sleep. Right, the sleep-wake cycle itself is a circadian rhythm, but we have ultradian cycles during our night sleep. So as you relax and you try to go to sleep, your brain waves cycle more and more slowly. Once you fall asleep, you'll go through 3 stages of relatively quiet sleep before you go to the more active dreaming stage. So there's a couple different waves. We got alpha waves. These are just your slow waves of a relaxed, awake brain. Right, and you can see it in the little thing there. Delta waves, those are large, slow waves of a deep sleep. So as you get into that last sleep, on this one, it used to be stage 3 and 4. You're going to see in the notes now, they've actually combined stage 3 and 4. Now these are all called non-REM sleep. So non-REM 1, non-REM 2, and non-REM 3 is just 3 and 4 combined. Because the old way of doing it, stage 3 and 4, they were pretty similar. Stage 4 is just a deeper sleep, but similar things were happening in there. And if you notice how the waves, as you go into a deeper sleep throughout the night, if you look at that picture there, the waves get slower and slower, right, and bigger. Until you get to REM sleep, that's when you dream, notice the waves get very active again. So you see this rapid eye movement, that's what REM stands for, right, because your brain becomes active again. Another thing we'll talk about during stage 2, you tend to have spindles. You see that right there. So randomly in stage 2, you tend to have these bursts of activities called spindles. And the last definition on this slide, hallucinations. These are just false sensory experiences, which you have when you're sleeping sometimes, and what we talk about with drugs as well, how you can hallucinate. All right, so here's just a little bit more up-to-date picture. We have your waking waves, you have your beta and alpha waves. REM sleep, you notice how it's a little bit more active. Then we break it down into, now we say non-REM 1, non-REM 2, and then non-REM 3. Notice how large those non-REM 3 stages are, right? That's where your delta waves are. And then obviously remember, REM is where your most active dreaming takes place. So the stages in a typical night's sleep. Notice it changes for younger and young adults and old adults. As you get older, your sleep habits change. We'll focus kind of on the young adults because that's like more of a typical one, and so each cycle is about a half or an hour and a half, and it does change throughout the night. But notice you start in awake, and then you go to, first you go to stage 1, right? Then you go to stage 2, then you go to stage 3, and then you have to go back up to stage 2, and then you go to REM sleep. So about an hour and a half throughout the night, that's when you start to dream, or your most vivid dreams in your REM sleep. Notice your REM sleep at the beginning of the night, it's not very long, right? So it's not very long at all. And then you go back down to stage 2, then to stage 3, back up to 2. Notice now your REM sleep's a little bit longer. A lot of times you might wake up for a little bit during the night. Rarely do we sleep all 8 hours without waking up for a few minutes. Then we go back down to maybe stage 1 for just a minute, then to stage 2, stage 3. Notice as the night goes on, stage 3 is getting less and less. Back up to 2. Now look how long your REM sleep is. Now you go back to stage 2. Maybe you wake up for a minute, and back to stage 2, because you really haven't left that stage 2 except for those couple minutes you were awake. Notice we don't go to non-REM 3 anymore. Then you go back to REM. Notice how this REM is even longer. Back to stage 2, REM, until eventually you wake up, and that cycle will continue at the end there until you wake up. So notice, stage 2 we'll talk about that's where you spend the most time in. About half your night's sleep is in stage 2, because you always go back to stage 2, where eventually, REM sleep is not that long in the beginning, and non-REM 3 eventually just disappears throughout the thing. And if you look down there at adults, that's they spend very little time in the non-REM 3, and they're constantly awakened throughout the night, and they tend not to sleep as long. So stages in a typical night's sleep, and this is what I was just talking about before. So the green would be the non-REM 3. At first, at the beginning of the night, your first hour of sleep, you're spending almost 25 minutes in that non-REM 3, and barely any in REM sleep. As the night goes on, you get more and more REM sleep, and you get less and less non-REM 3 until eventually it disappears. So now we're just going to discuss each of the three stages of non-REM, and then we'll talk about REM. So with non-REM 1, you will not know the exact moment when you enter stage 1 of sleep. Usually it only lasts a few minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. You're easily awakened from this stage and will probably insist that you were never asleep. So have you ever done this, like your parents like, just go to bed, you're falling asleep. You're like, what are you talking about? I haven't fallen asleep. But yet then you look at the TV and there's a whole nother show on. You're like, oh yeah, maybe I did fall asleep a little bit. Or the teacher says, hey, wake up. I wasn't sleeping. But yet, the rest of the class is gone and you're still sleeping. Another thing that happens during this time is you also may report dreamlike sensations of falling or floating weightlessly upon being woken up. So a lot of times, if you ever jerk because you thought you were falling or something like this, especially like your arm or your leg, that is, a sign of non-REM 1 sleep, which is funny if anyone's ever done that during class, because all of a sudden then you wake up and everyone's looking at you, and that's why you don't fall asleep in class. So non-REM 2, right? Your brain waves slow down even more during non-REM 2. You have these little brainwave bursts I was talking about earlier called spindles are common during this stage. Sleep talking is also common during this stage. So you need to know what goes on in each stage. So that's going to be important for this unit. What are some of the key things that happen in each stage? So sleep talking usually occurs in stage 2, but it can happen in any other stage. So sometimes that's a question that tricks people because there might be a question, when can you have sleep talking? And technically it's all the stages, even though it's most common in stage 2. The first time you enter the stage, it'll last about 20 minutes, but over the course of the night, you'll spend about half of your night's sleep in stage 2 because, like I said earlier, you constantly go back to stage 2, where stage 3 eventually disappears. Stage 2 doesn't disappear. So a couple key things in stage 2, right? This is where you have spindles. This is where you're most likely to sleep talk. And this is where you spend half your night's sleep. Non-REM 3. Right, so after about 30 minutes of sleep, your brainwaves slow down a lot, right? Your brain cycles are less than 1 cycle per second. Compare this to the 15 cycles per second when you first fall asleep. So that's how much your brain has slowed down, right? So it's rejuvenating, right? Sleep is extremely important. You need to relax. This stage is also called slow wave sleep or delta sleep because you got delta waves going on at this time. The first time you're in these rejuvenation stages, it lasts about 30 minutes. Like I said, around halfway through the night, by your 4th cycle, it disappears. What's common in this stage? Sleepwalking, right? So sleepwalking is common in this stage. Also night terrors. So night terrors, which is different. So nightmares, you have, when you're dreaming, like during REM sleep. Night terrors is when you have in your deep sleep. And what's key about like sleepwalking and night terrors, you're not supposed to wake them up. Because have you ever been like woken up in a deep sleep and then you're startled and you have no idea where you are? That's what would happen to them. So if you see someone sleepwalking, you're just supposed to like guide them back to bed so they don't hurt themselves. But you're not supposed to wake them up because they might freak out. Same thing with night terrors. And sleepwalking is actually, they've done studies on this, and it's a lot more common than you think, just especially with kids. Just we're not aware of it because we're sleeping. So a lot of times we don't realize that we do sleepwalk. But, in sleep studies, they found out a lot more people do it than we realize. REM sleep, right? REM sleep. So the previous 3 stages have been part of non-REM sleep or non-rapid eye movement. After you reach stage 3, your brain waves will begin to pick up a little bit more speed and strength. You'll move back up through non-REM 2, non-REM 1, and then you enter your first period of REM sleep. So REM sleep is a reoccurring sleep stage during which vivid dreams commonly occur. So it's also called paradoxical sleep, another name for it, because the muscles of the body are relaxed, but the other body systems are active. So your brain's very active, but your body's not going to be moving. Otherwise, because if you live out your dreams, you'd be moving all over the place. So if you look at this PET scan of these 2 brains here, right? So the darker it is, like the darker red, the more active that parts of the brain are. So you have your normal sleep. Notice how relaxed this brain is in normal sleep. And then you have REM sleep over here. Notice how many more red areas you have, which just means the brain's that much more active. And when you dream, usually you're dreaming about what happened that day, at least your first dream of the night is. And so whatever you did during that day, whatever part of your brain was active then, when you dream, pretty much that same part of the brain is going to be active again. The first period of REM will not last long. When it is finished, you will return to stage 1 of sleep and start the cycle all over again. So the 90-minute ultradian rhythm continues all night, but non-REM sleep is eventually skipped. So the last 4 hours of sleep are spent between stage 2 and REM, typically. Remember I talked about REM also. It starts off short at the beginning of the night, but by the end of the night, it lasts a lot longer. So here's an important chart to look at. It shows your sleep-wake cycle throughout your life, right? So if you notice, the younger you are, the more sleep you get. So this is your total amount of sleep up here. All right, so this line represents the total sleep you're getting. And the pink area represents your REM sleep. Notice when you're younger, pretty much half of your sleep is REM sleep because, I mean, it just shows how important REM sleep actually is. So it's extremely important that you get that. Notice that newborns are sleeping up to 16 hours a day. At least the parents are hoping they're sleeping that long. Luckily, my kids were pretty good sleepers when they were babies, at least. So as you get older, you notice you require less and less sleep. So you guys as teenagers should be about here, which is a little bit over 8 hours of sleep. All right. Now think, how many of you guys get a little bit over 8 hours of sleep? Usually have about 1 or 2 per class. Getting more sleep is one of the easiest and best things you can do to improve your quality of life, actually. It makes a big difference with your health, your attitude, a lot of different things. Sleep debt. So most adults need to sleep about 8 hours or a little bit more to feel good and function efficiently. However, most Americans get significantly less than 8 hours of sleep. Oftentimes, we attribute afternoon drowsiness to a big lunch or really the result of, but yet it's really the result of sleep debt. Similarly, people say that they fall asleep when they're bored. In reality, restlessness is a normal response to boredom, not sleepiness. So I hear this from students all the time, oh, I just couldn't stay awake in the class just because they're so boring. They might be boring, but that's not necessarily the reason why you're falling asleep. It's because you have sleep debt, right? And sleep debt lasts about 2 weeks, where you can make that up. Once the 2 weeks are gone, you can't really make up that sleep debt. That's why a lot of times people say, man, I slept like 10 hours last night or 12 hours, but yeah, I'm still so tired. And that is because you are in a huge sleep debt. Sleep deprivation. So what are some of the effects of sleep loss when you're not getting enough sleep? It's actually extremely dangerous because you tend to be fatigued. You tend to be have impaired concentration. I know when I'm tired, like I can't concentrate on anything, whether I'm supposed to be like in a class or in a meeting listening to something or even trying to read a book. If I have sleep deprivation, I can't concentrate at all. Depressed immune system, right? So if you're really sick, a lot of times you might sleep like most of the day. That's because you're building up your immune system. It's extremely important when you sleep to it's extremely important to sleep to help your immune system. Even when you're babies, that's one of the reasons why you're sleeping so much because you're building that immune system. And then you have greater vulnerability to accidents. Notice when you sleep deprived, you tend to make a lot of accidents, whether you trip over stuff or, as we'll see on the next slide, especially like car accidents and things like that. So here's a study that was done, and it shows how sleep deprivation really does cause more car accidents. So the chart on the left shows springtime changes, right? Hour sleep loss. So in the spring, we spring ahead, you sleep less, and it causes more accidents because in the spring, you'll lose an hour of sleep. So this right here is the Monday before the time change. Notice how many accidents there were. And then this is the Monday after the time change. So you just lost an hour of sleep. Notice how many more accidents are on that following Monday. Now, could it just be a correlation? Sure. But we did the same thing in the fall, right? And so the fall, you gain an hour of sleep. So the Monday before the sleep, the time change, this is how many accidents. Notice how many less accidents there were the Monday following the time change. So you gained an hour of sleep, you're more rested, less sleep deprivation, less accidents. Right? So sleep deprivation, can cause major accidents. In fact, they talk, and we'll talk about in the next slide, how it is next to alcohol, the leading cause of fatal car crashes. In fact, you see that right there. So sleep deprivation and its effects, right? So lack of sleep is a health issue that deserves your attention and your doctor's help. Not getting enough sleep due to the insomnia or sleep disorders such as obstructive sleep apnea, or simply because you're keeping late hours, can affect your mood, memory, and health in far-reaching and surprising ways, says Johns Hopkins sleep researcher Patrick Finnegan. Sleep deprivation can also affect your judgment so that you don't notice its effects. Right, so you tend to have bad judgments as well. So we'll just go, how can this affect you? Your safety, right? 6,000 fatal car crashes caused by drowsiness driving each year. 1 in 24 adults who've fallen asleep at the wheel in the past month. Right, so that's a lot. So, I mean, a lot of people are not or driving tired, and that's what leads to so many accidents. Effects on your brain at the bottom, right? It says 33% increase for dementia risk if you are someone who lacks sleep throughout your life. You also have a greater risk for depression, irritability, anxiety, forgetfulness, and fuzzy thinking. 3 to 5 years is how much sleep deprivation can age your brain, right? So you can literally live 3 to 5 years longer just by getting enough sleep. I'll go back up to the top here for health. Your less active immunity protectors called natural killer cells. 36% increase in risk for cancer, nearly 3 times risk for type 2 diabetes, increased risk for high blood pressure, 48% increase in developing heart disease, right? 3 times more likely to catch a common cold. I mean, just by not getting enough sleep. So you see how important sleep is. And the last thing we talked about is weight. You have more cravings for sweet, salty, and starchy foods if you don't get enough sleep. So the higher levels of the hunger hormone, ghrelin. So because of that, without sleep, now you start craving all these unhealthy foods. It also lowers the level of your appetite control hormone, leptin. So when you're not getting enough sleep, we tend to eat more and junkier foods. And lastly, 50% higher risk for obesity if you get less than 5 hours of sleep a night. So if you're averaging less than 5 hours, that's really low, and 50% likely to be obese. So as you can tell, sleep is extremely important, and students give me excuses all the time, but yet you have to fit it in somehow, right? You need to, organize your schedule, be more efficient with your time, and you have to build in that sleep, right? It can really help you in the long run.